Hi, everyone. I'm Jian Zhou. Thank you for joining us. It's my true pleasure to introduce Dr. Kim Fortun. So I've been thinking about how did I get to know her? Because her scholarship on late industrialism is so central to my work now. I'm revising my dissertation. So I was like trying to remember when did I actually first come across her writing. And I first encountered Professor Fortun's work as a first-year PhD student. So I was taking this methods course, and we read her article on ethnography in late industrialism. And in that article, she proposed that we should reinvent ethnography, not as a method of simply documenting events, but as a collaborative platform for identifying the limits of existing discourses and for creating new forms of knowledge, and also for countering a will to not know by actively cultivating a subject with a will to know differently. So I thought this is very suitable for our theme pedagogy too. And of course, I thought, oh, okay, I understood her, I understand her argument. But then I didn't. So it wasn't until years later that those words came back to me in a new light. So, while I was doing field work. So my research had originally focused on disaster refugees from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, and it happened in 2011. And I started my fieldwork in 2017. And the political landscape had already shifted. So one professor even told me, "You've come too late. There is nothing to study about the nuclear disaster." So that's the first thing I heard when I visited a local university. And I felt my field was dissolving. So this was when Dr. Fortun's writing on late industrialism and her work on the Bhopal disaster truly began to resonate with me. Teaching me how to see my field was actually opening up rather than closing. So in the piece I mentioned earlier, she rhetorically asks, and I quote, "Could the ethnographer or the researcher, if I may paraphrase, stage something different, a carefully designed encounter intended to provoke what neither side could say or imagine coming in?" And by asking this question, she was suggesting that when we study the complex unfolding of environmental issues, we must resist simply accepting problems as they are presented to us. Instead, we should critically expand them into a problem space that can be explored with other people. Throughout her scholarship, she has also taught us that people involved in a particular problem space have working positionalities, which not only shape their individual perspectives on the problems, but also constitute the very shape of those problems themselves. Staying with this intellectually complex and emotionally difficult space is hard work, but it has the potential to generate new forms of knowledge, relationships, and desires, as her own advocacy-driven scholarship shows. So there's no way to do justice to the full breadth of her scholarship, but let me briefly introduce her more formally. So Dr. Kim Fortun is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. She is also director of UCI EcoGovLab and a member of AIR UCI. She received her PhD in anthropology from Rice University and a BA in history and philosophy from Duke University. Her groundbreaking ethnography on the Bhopal disaster in India, advocacy after Bhopal, environmentalism, disaster, and new global orders received the Sharon Stevens Prize from the American Ethnological Society and set the stage for her career spanning focus on environmental and disaster governance. From 2005 to 2010, she served as a co-editor for the Journal of Cultural Anthropology, and from 2017 to 2019 as president of the Society for Social Studies of Science. She currently co-edits the Critical Studies in Risk and Disaster book series and the recently launched Journal of Disaster Studies, both published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. As an advocate scholar, Dr. Fortun collaborates extensively with community-based environmental justice organizations. She is part of the design group for the Platform for Experimental and Collaborative Ethnography, PECE, which is an open source, open access digital platform for anthropological and historical research. She also leads the development of another digital platform, Disaster STS Network, which was established as an instance of peace in the wake of Japan's 3/11 disaster. Her recent writing, some of which we read for the workshop, examines the praxis of diverse environmental advocates and reads the Anthropocene as a call for new kinds of collaboration and knowledge infrastructure. She is also helping to lead the Environmental Injustice Global Record, an initiative to build an expansive archive and set of analyses demonstrating the dynamics of environmental justice in different settings. One aim of this project is to connect geographically distributed people working on related problems within and beyond universities, and another is to build a digital knowledge commons to support ongoing environmental governance research, teaching, and advocacy. As an instructor, because we're talking about teaching, she's been teaching courses on archive ethnography, science and technology studies, disaster governance, environmental injustice, environmental health, data and information, and sustainability studies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kim Fortun.
First, just a really appreciative thank you for that lovely, really special introduction. And it's always nice to learn how your work travels and becomes something else with other researchers. So I appreciated that very much. It's an honor to be with you here today to talk about environmental futures and ways our pedagogies can open these up. Thanks to all of you for joining, and special thanks to our hosts, Professor Dwara and Dr. Cho. I first want to commend our hosts for organizing this workshop and the Environmental Futures in Asia Network. This kind of academic organizing, which builds the social infrastructure from which new knowledge and governance infrastructures can emerge, is critically important today. The workshop's focus on pedagogy also recognizes the importance of knowledge infrastructuring from livable environmental futures. I share a deep commitment to this. As our host foreground, Asia is an especially important focus for this work as a site of extraordinary environmental volatility, intricately entangled with entrenched economic models and visions of the good life. Also, as a site from which new frames for apprehending, envisioning, and enacting environmental futures can take shape. In our call for participation today, our host said that a key goal is to develop a pedagogical project that supports deeper integration of research on Asia's environmental histories, contemporary environmental issues, and environmental futures into classrooms and communities. Importantly, they see such a pedagogical project as both a critical product of the Environmental Futures in Asia Network and as a way to galvanize it. Again, my own commitments and strategic sensibilities are very much in step. Today, I'll share some of the steps I've taken thus far to build environmental research and teaching capacities, seeing both research and teaching as at their best when interlaced. I'll deliver my presentation in 3 acts, first describing the world as I've learned about it through my research, coming to think of it as late industrial. I'll next decide ways I've taught to that world, envisioning my students within it, using varied pedagogical tactics, continually iterating as I observe what seems to work and what doesn't, always drawing on what I've learned through varied critical literatures. In the 3rd act, I'll describe the knowledge infrastructures I've helped build to support late industrial research and teaching, ending with a clear call for collaboration, and to suggest ways to do this in the near term. My cover slide includes 3 attesting figures that I've had the honor to collaborate with in recent years. Yesenia Morujo, attesting to disproportionate cumulative pollution burden in the largely Latino city of Santa Ana, California. Diane Wilson, attesting to plastics pollution on the Texas Gulf Coast from a massive Taiwanese-owned Formosa plant. And Nancy Bui, a Vietnamese American fighting for restorative justice after a massive marine release of toxins from a Formosa steel plant in Vietnam's central provinces. The approach to pedagogy and knowledge infrastructure that I'll share here is both inspired by these figures and designed to support them. And I want my students to be ready to follow their lead. It is important to note an incongruity today in the United States, especially in envisioning my students in varied roles as environmental stewards, as these roles within government and research are slashed and the data supporting the work disappeared. I expect everyone has been following this, but let me provide a few snapshots that I've organized for teaching under a concept that I've called Trump Square. Young scientists are losing their careers and our ecosystems are losing management and protection. Effort to address uneven distribution of environmental harms have been terminated. Environmental data of all sorts is gone, as is data on compounding the vulnerabilities. Very close to home, this is a termination notice for an NSF-funded training program that I've been part of to give earth science postbacks and graduate students humanist perspectives on climate justice, because the work, quote, is not aligned with NSF's new priorities. The speed at which these cuts have happened have been stunning, undercutting sense-making by design. It's thus especially important that we come together today to set the stage for something else. So let the play begin. Act 1, late industrial worlds. I'll start near the beginning. I grew up on the Texas Gulf Coast, one of the most petrochemical intensive regions in the world. There are over 400 petrochemical production facilities along the 50-mile Houston Ship Channel that links the oil fields of West Texas and beyond to the ocean and international markets. Every Sunday growing up, my family would drive through the plants along the Ship Channel on my way to my grandparents' house in nearby Baytown, a town that proudly announces itself as where water and oil mix. Baytown is home to one of the largest refineries in the world. Petrochemical companies provide science curriculum to local schools in a program titled Making Science Make Sense. I also have roots through my mother's family in the region around Charleston, West Virginia, another petrochemical hub, proud to be the birthplace of petrochemicals in the US, and home to the sister plant of the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, that killed thousands of people in 1984 with extensive legacy effects through today. Bhopal, in the aftermath of the 1984 disaster, was where I started my research career in the early 1990s. The Bhopal disaster continues to be a lodestone in my research and teaching today. But it's not these personal connections that drew me into the problem space of environmental governance and justice. Remarkably, I literally drove right through the petrochemical landscapes that I grew up in, not seeing them, like many of the students I teach today. We're currently, after many years of teaching, I've learned that environmental harms, even those in my students' home communities, are not noticed. They have not learned to see them. As anthropologist Loretta Liu described through her work in Guangzhou, they have learned the art of unnoticing. In Professor Duar's terms, in his work on deforestation and dam building in the Mekong region, these students reenact the epistemic engine of entrenched political economic systems. Importantly, my understanding of my students' modes of attention is not only anecdotal. UCI anthropology student Margaret Tebe has interviewed over 75 of our students over the last couple of years, students in a large 300-plus general education course called Environmental Injustice that we teach together with others on an evolving teaching team. Most of our students at UCR are from California and often from communities with visible sources of environmental harm. There are high schools often above freeways, as you see here. Many see oil pump jacks from the windows of their homes. Yet when first asked if they are a stakeholder in environmental governance and justice, many say no. I think of this not noticing as a late industrial effect, a display of the logic of enclosures that continue to shape so much thought and action, despite simultaneous development, especially since the 1980s, of rich, extensively evidenced understanding of the relations that bind us across space, time, scales, and species. This paradox animates critical late industrial dynamics. The GIS map shown here, showing the proximity of California's K-12 schools to industrial facilities with the potential for a Bhopal-like catastrophic off-site release of toxic chemicals, was also made by Margaret. We used the map to help students in environmental injustice select a place to focus on in their environmental justice governance case study research. And this takes me to my research career in Bhopal. I arrived in Bhopal for PhD research in 1989, 6 years after a catastrophic chemical leak at an American-owned Union Carbide pesticide plant that killed thousands within a few days and undercut the life chances of hundreds of thousands. At that time, impacted families had not received any compensation. This is 6 or 7 years later, creating extraordinary and inexcusable hardship. At the same time, the government of India limited litigation by establishing itself as parens patriae, the legal protector of citizens unable to protect themselves. Meanwhile, the Bhopal case was before the Indian Supreme Court and soon settled for an amount widely regarded internationally as wholly inadequate. Government of India representatives said that upholding the settlement should be understood as a message to multinational corporations that they were welcome and would be well supported in India. The contradictions and conflicts of interest were gross, exhibiting deep fissures and shifts in the social contract promised at Indian independence. The shift is instructive today as we roil from the Trump administration's decimation of USAID, FEMA, the EPA, and the Center for Disease Control. Envision the implications for acute disaster prevention and response. Who will work to mitigate and respond to disasters like these going forward? What data resources will they have to work with? What did the abandonment of Bhopal foreshadow? Importantly, I learned that while the Bhopal disaster was exceptional in its magnitude, it is not exceptional in its structure. The conditions for environmental disasters of many kinds are shared across many places. There is pattern as well as variation. As this slide shows, the Bhopal plant was not a dramatic presence on the landscape, easy to drive by. Tank 610, which released 40,000 tons of toxic MIC over the city of Bhopal, was buried underground. Late industrialism is hard to see. This project to understand air governance across different cities in the United States and Asia furthered my thinking about late industrialism, as has ongoing work to understand different fence lines in communities in the United States. It is across these places and cases that I've come to sustain work on late industrialism. This slide again shows the landscape that I grew up in and drove right through into my early adulthood. Each of the 45 plus red circles represents a facility within the city limits of Houston with Bhopal-like chemical disaster potential. The blue dots are schools. Toxic saturation of our landscapes is the grounds of late industrialism. Late industrialism points to both a historic period since the mid-1980s and an analytic framework that draws out issues of particular concern for environmental governance. Soil landscapes, the complex relationships between ecosystem and human health, and between the health of humans, rats, mice, and other sentinel species. The longue durée in which environmental problems become manifest and consequent governance challenges. The largely unregulated, much less maintained aging of our industrial infrastructure. The emergence of new modes of high-risk industrial activity, shale gas extraction, for example, the escalation of which shown in this slide, along with the continuing productivity of industrial culture and desire, shown on this side, with high throughput of consumers who love and depend on toxic products. Increasingly intricate interlacing of commercial interests in what counts as scientific knowledge, the exacerbations of climate deregulation, and an urgent need for fundamentally new social contracts and alternative futures. Part of what late industrialism affords is the way the everyday real is produced through the interactions of many scales and types of systems, sedimented with history, laced with commercial interest, ecological and atmospheric systems, technological and political economic systems, discursive and perspectival systems, all interlaced with schismogenic tendencies to amplify through their interactions. The tight coupling and dependence of these scales and systems produces constant unrest, exhausting old paradigms. This is a deep pedagogical as well as operational challenge, requiring what anthropologist Adriana Petrina, writing about fire professionals today, describes as horizoning work to operationalize a future without a baseline. Margaret, I'll note, is working with Petrina's conception of horizon work to understand children's environmental knowledge and ways their environmental knowledge can be animated in her dissertation research in California's Central Valley. Like conceptualization of risk society, the Anthropocene, and a just transition from brown to green economies, late industrialism is both empirical and evaluative, drawing out system dynamics and harms with special attention to cultural dimensions. The cultural logic of late industrialism is, of course, complex, varied across time and place, and both historical and emergent. A recurrent aspect, especially relevant here, is its manufactured essentialism, the way it trains us not to see our surroundings and how things connect, the way it stages us to drive right by environmental harms. How then have I worked this out pedagogically? Let's now turn to Act 2, Pedagogies of Late Industrialism. I'll again start by setting the stage, describing the scenes of my pedagogy over many years. I began teaching in the early 1990s, just after my years in Bhopal. It was a sober time for me, to say the least. But I was fortunate and honored to start my teaching in a community college near Rice University, where I was finishing my degree. My students were mostly middle-aged women, some of whom had just started their college careers, some who had returned after a long hiatus. They were great teachers, full of questions, yearning for analytic capability, mesmerized by what a close reading could draw out, all while deeply unsure of themselves, sometimes literally lacking the ability to speak. Such struggles for articulation can come from many places. I've encountered it in many guises. An important goal of my teaching is to support such struggles, scaffolding capacity to turn thought into words that connect, words that can both express and prompt analysis and interpretation. It isn't just about giving voice, a common way of thinking about our aims in both the classroom and community education. It's about building analytic and interpretive capacities. The project needs to be one of critical pedagogy, as I've learned to think about it from theorists such as Paulo Freire, Gayatri Spivak, and Donald Winnicott. After graduate school, I started teaching at RPI in upstate New York, the oldest engineering school in the country. Engineers, I learned, could only tolerate the complexities that I wanted to teach them if I also gave them opportunities to fix them. They were very solution-oriented, which I appreciated. This didn't, however, mean that they were very good at translating knowledge into practice. That's the start of my work with an assignment that asked students, often in groups, to design advocacy projects that require them to read sociocultural, political, economic landscapes, then propose a technical intervention, operationalizing humanist understanding. I thus learned to meet engineering students while also learning the power of translational assignments that ask students to move from knowledge to action, turning nuanced understandings of problems and their cross-scalar context into workable designs for change. Notably, I've found that graduate students are often even worse at translational thinking than undergraduates. Ask them how to fix the problems they study, and they become paralyzed, or can't even hear the question. This is not a critique of individuals, but of our pedagogies thus far. It is a critique of the way a knowledge-action binary still grounds us, undercutting both practical possibilities and ways involvement in action sharpens research sensibilities. The Environmental Futures in Asia Network will have to take this on in building an action-oriented research community. I've also learned from my engineering students about the pedagogical power of debate and role play. I first staged these debates to respond to the tendency of engineering students to only find ethics in scenarios where there was a clear right and wrong, with truth in clear opposition to error. If these oppositions weren't in place, there could, in their view, be no ethical judgment in action. I wanted to deflect this, drawing them into complex problems, often driven by forceful power dynamics, often calling quite urgently for response, despite the lack of good data or good options. Calling the engineering students into debate and role play worked well for this, challenging them to develop nuanced understanding of different stakeholders in a problem and their different modes of problematization. It also challenged their subjectivities, obliging them to enter the fray, exercising judgment and voicing commitment despite themselves, so to speak. I've also recognized that reticence to enter the fray of knowledge translation is far from limited to engineers. Indeed, most students are encultured to stand aside, not seeing knowledge and action as generatively entangled. I've thus come to see pedagogical tactics that challenge entrenched subject formations as critical in eco-ed. These tactics are especially important in educational contexts, like many in Asia, where educational relationships are very hierarchical and curricular content is stripped of politics. At RPI, I also helped build a program called Eco-Ed, in which RPI students designed and delivered environmental education for elementary and middle school students. Eco-Ed was a bit circus-like. There were many rings of activity and balls in the air. The youngest students, as you see here, learned to turn what they learned about the science of environmental problems into stories. The upper elementary students came to see themselves as researchers with results to share with their community. My undergraduate students learned even more. They learned to think carefully, even ethnographically, about the elementary and middle school students they work with. They learned to design learning activities that taught through actions as well as words. Like this game AQI says, the AQI is the Air Quality Index. And they learned to deeply respect the experience and expertise of elementary and middle school teachers who became important collaborators. Collaboration, I've learned, is best sustained through co-creative projects. I'll now skip ahead to the way I've come to teach with and help students develop their own case studies of environmental harms in different places. I first did this with students that I teach in a master's program jointly offered by Nagasaki University and Fukushima Medical School, developed in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The goal is to produce a community of professionals ready to help respond to radiation disasters around the world. Most of the students are health scientists and practitioners, almost always without any prior training in the humanities and social sciences. Most came from uranium and radiation intensive places like Kazakhstan and Belarus. From the outset, I've spent my short time with them each year since about 2015, working through different cases of radiation harm around the world. Students then develop their own case studies, demonstrating that they know how to parse an unfamiliar place, envisioning how they might work there themselves. Worth noting is the structure of this teaching. The course is fully virtual with 8 90-minute sessions over 8 weeks. Going forward, I think we should offer more courses like this, courses that cut across geography, discipline, and unevenly distributed educational opportunities. We also use case studies in different ways in an array of classes at UCI. This is our large environmental injustice course, and in community education. So let me say a bit more about teaching with case studies and why I hope to draw you into this. The environmental justice case study framework helps students and communities zoom into a particular place while building comparative perspective, recognizing that environmental disasters and injustice are both common and unique in the ways they take shape and play out. Questions in the case study framework guide their analyses, allowing them to look at a case and ask, what is this a case of? A research sketchbook helps them deepen their response to each question, mapping hazards in the setting focused on, for example, stakeholders, compounding vulnerabilities, and the many intersecting injustices that produce environmental injustice and environmental governance challenges. Case studies push against distraction from environmental harms by drawing students into the often urgent human dimensions of environmental governance. Writing and building case studies themselves allows students to both invest in a place and create knowledge resources useful to people in that place. Since case studies are both descriptive and prescriptive, moving from analysis to proposals for action at local as well as extra-local scales, they also build students' sense of their own agency and responsibility. A goal is to reroute these students so that they don't just drive through environmental harms, not noticing them. I've tried to highlight here how all scenes of teaching are different, yet can be enacted through strategies and tactics developed across them. Pedagogy thus needs to be adaptive while also cumulatively and continually research refreshed. Pedagogy thus needs to just traverse habitual divides between research and teaching, theory and practice. It also points to the need to work collectively and to build infrastructure to support that collectivity, so that as teachers, we can build on the works that came before us, learn to teach better side by side, and enable a next generation. I'll elaborate on this in Act 3. To open Act 3, I'll again return to Bhopal and the crude board of photos used to search for those missing in the days after the gas leak. This image has stayed with me, coming to embolize what I now understand as a deep deficit of knowledge infrastructure to support environmental governance, of fast disasters like the Bhopal gas leak and the release of radiation from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, of the slow disasters of routine pollution, higher temperatures, and water scarcity, and of the combo disasters that occur when extreme weather resulting from climate change exacerbates toxic hazards, as when petrochemical plants, factory farms, and landfills are damaged by high wind and flooding, releasing exceptional pollution to the air and nearby waterways, usually becoming a slow disaster with many years of cleanup. We don't have the knowledge infrastructure to attend to these problems. I've observed this again and again across settings. Stemming from this observation, a key focus of my research has been on ways knowledge infrastructure subtends both environmental vulnerability and capacity to recognize and address such vulnerability. I've also been proactive in helping build knowledge infrastructure, including educational programs at all levels, supporting technical infrastructure, public data resources, analytic and visualization capabilities, and the organizational forms needed to support and connect these. This is what the right side of the image represents, my movement from Bhopal to deep investments in knowledge infrastructure, including the Disaster STS Network digital platform, a project I've invested in for almost a decade, trying to infrastructure a variegated transnational disaster research community ready to respond to disaster from widely varied positions. Environmental disasters and possibilities for environmental futures are at the center of the work. Important to note here is that Japan's 3/11 disaster was the impetus after a memorable meeting that made our limited capacity for variegated research collaboration starkly visible. The meeting brought together what I'll call hermeneutes like myself with much more applied researchers from the US, Japan, and elsewhere, with Japanese bureaucrats present to both learn from and oversee the proceedings. Interactions were at times tense, even uncivil, with specialists in one aspect of the disaster, Japanese history and political culture, earthquakes, floods, and nuclear meltdown, showing obvious disdain for what specialists in other areas didn't get. Tensions between more applied and more historical and theoretically oriented researchers were also in play. To be fair, nerves were frayed. The nuclear plant was not controlled. Contamination concerns were high. Many people were displaced without any sense of what was possible going forward. Some criticized the evacuation as more deadly than the nuclear explosion itself. Trust in government officials, scientists, and health professionals was lost. Everyone in the room felt called to account. But we didn't have the practice, much less infrastructure, to work across our differences. It was after this that we began building the Disaster STS network and supporting digital infrastructure. This slide points to a seminar series we hosted to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, designed to push our collaborative capacity, with this session focused on pedagogy. The Disaster STS digital network's digital infrastructure is an instance of the platform for experimental collaborative ethnography, PEACE, which was mentioned earlier, an open source and access digital space designed by and for qualitative researchers, supporting data curation, what we've called collaborative hermeneutics, and multimodal publishing. Building active pathways between research and teaching is a key goal. The Disaster STS network and digital infrastructure continues to be both under construction and aspirational, a stage we are building as we act on it, a stage meant to provide technical as well as methodological and conceptual infrastructure for deeply creative and expansively collaborative next generation environmental and disaster research, rendered such that research can constantly refresh our teaching. That's my deep interest in what this community envisions for environmental research and teaching going forward. I'll be listening for opportunities for continuing collaboration. The graphic we use to mark the DSTS network is, of course, the Pangea, pointing to ways the world might be rendered differently through our work. One especially active project on the Disaster STS network platform today is the Environmental Governance Global Record, which brings together globally distributed research groups to work side by side in building archival material and analyses to understand the dynamics of environmental governance in different settings. The Environmental Injustice Global Record and associated EcoEd curriculum project are run by the University of California EcoGov Lab. We maintain an open call for new collaborators and would love to draw in more researchers and cases focused on Asia. Currently, Asian cases under construction in the Environmental Governance Global Record focus on extreme heat in Hyderabad, the Tumalapalli uranium mine in southwest India, a toxic chemical spill on Vietnam's central coast, cumulative air pollution risk in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and on the financialization of carbon management in northwest China. The Kaohsiung Archive is especially nicely built out example led by Professor Wenling Tu at Taiwan's Tsinghua University. And you see kind of components of the archive here. The Kaohsiung Archive was built up using the tactics of archive ethnography. The contents of the archive have been relayed into diverse public domains, such as this coffee shop, in an array of creative ways. This slide shows some of the ways archive content can be presented in the project. This is a collection of interviews here and a timeline of a lawsuit here. The Environmental Injustice Global Record addresses a critical, classically anthropological problem in environmental governance, characterizing both pattern and variation in environmental governance across settings. Environmental injustice surrounding the massive hog farms of eastern North Carolina involve a different tangle of factors than the environmental justice around the abandoned uranium mines on Navajo Nation. Environmental injustice around the petrochemical industry in Texas and Louisiana is markedly different from the environmental injustice resulting from oil extraction and refining in California. Even within California, there is dizzying variation in the forms environmental injustice takes, going global to sites in Taiwan, Vietnam, and India, among others, complicates the picture even forward. The diversity of issues in play is overwhelming. Paradoxically, this makes it all the more important to learn across sites, drawing out patterns and borrowing approaches. This is the aim of the Environmental Injustice Global Record. Importantly, the Environmental Injustice Global Record started with teaching and the need for rich empirical examples to move students through to prepare them to become the environmental experts and governance actors that late industrialism demands. It is also designed to leverage side-by-side development of cases, allowing juxtapositional empirics to continually shift our attention and frame, drawing out variation as well as pattern. A few examples illustrate what these juxtapositions engender: capacity to recognize different kinds of community assets and resiliency across sites, capacity to recognize different kinds of what we've called data divergence, which occurs when different data are used to characterize problems or there are different interpretations of the same data to explain what happened, the results, and possible remedies. Capacity to parse the different kinds of injustice that combine to produce environmental injustice, often pointing to specific possibilities for intervention. So this points to the importance of teaching concepts through our cases, giving students an analytic and interpretive language for environmental sense-making. Different cases can offer especially rich material for teaching different concepts. This community, for example, clearly has especially rich cases for teaching the concept of cooperative management, which I understand was the focus of your meeting in Jeju last year. Cooperative management of fisheries, irrigation systems, and forests, for example. This is the way we've organized our concepts in the archive so that it's easy for people to find concepts, concept curriculum that others have developed, making it easy to share concept curriculum. I'm now working, for example, to extend support for teaching the concept of procedural injustice, highlighting ways it contributes to epistemic injustice. This is what a concept page in the archive looks like close up. We also curate other crosscuts, our term for curriculum that is useful across cases, connecting them. This part of the archive, for example, provides materials supporting all sites where ethylene oxide is a hazard, envisioning ways people in those places could work to get together to mitigate those hazards. As was done in an event last September, which brought together people in and researching uranium-exposed communities in Navajo and Laguna Pueblo, both in New Mexico, with people grounded in South Africa and Brazil. To hold all this together, we use the 10-question case study framework that I described earlier, using it to lightly structure our archives, priming them for use in teaching. The Environmental Governance Global Record allows me to follow other researchers as they develop their analyses, drawing what they document and learn into my research and teaching with attribution. It also provides a structure for developing and sharing my own research, prompting me to consider curricular material a critically important scholarly product, as NSS calls it, and form of scientific communication. We've leveraged the Environmental Governance Global Record in the last few days, for example, in an excursion to Robeson County, North Carolina, one of the poorest counties in the state, a county overwhelmed by industrial meat growing operations, a county pummeled by hurricanes and extreme heat. We were introduced to community advocates in Robeson County through collaborators in the Environmental Governance Global Record, Rebecca Witter at App State and Dana Powell, formerly at App State, now at Taipei Medical University. We traveled to meet these community advocates, Reverend Mac Legerton and Lumbee Elder Donna Chavez, so that we could better teach the case and to listen for ways we could support their work. While there, we ran a workshop for the Disaster Survival and Resiliency School established by the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development In this, we will able to share stories of many different community development and disaster preparedness efforts beyond our own research. We're also able to build on pedagogical tactic we've used before, tuned to the situation. The Environmental Governance Global Record is designed to support this kinds of transversal research and pedagogy. How then might people here and in the broader Environmental Futures in Asian network join us in the work described? I'll point to just a few of the possibilities. I'll also welcome your ideas. First, you could bring your own research into the Environmental Governance Global Record, building multimodal collections of material that evidence your scholarly arguments, that can be relayed into teaching, that support the work of your community partners, and that contribute to a discoverable research commons that will strengthen environmental governance and research going forward. Importantly, you could bring in new places or new crosscuts, a collection of material demonstrating the varied dynamics of cooperative management of ecological resources, for example, or a collection on dams as hazards. For this, you would need to register and learn to use the Disaster STS Network digital platform. UCI EcoGov Lab can help with this. You also could bring your students into environmental governance case study development. The curriculum materials we've developed for this have Creative Commons licenses that allow free adoption and adaptation. UCI EcoGov Lab can also help jumpstart this. Bringing in your own curriculum and field excursion designs is yet another option. We have developed, for example, driving and walking tours of 2 spaces in Southern California that are now available for use by others. Come visit us and take these tours and share your own. So let's discuss the possibilities and answer your questions. Thank you for your attention.